Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
If you've served in the military, the Alaska VA welcomes you home and thanks you for your service. We encourage you to enroll for the VA healthcare benefits. Apply online in less than 5 minutes. You can also print, fax, or mail the 2-page form to the VA. You do not need your DD-214 to apply.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service, and we'll get started tonight by taking a look at our hazards map around the state today. We do have a couple of flood warnings out in the Tanana Valley region on the north side of the Brooks Range until about 8:45 p.m. Thursday. Some high water is expected in those areas due to the recent record rainfalls in the Fairbanks area. Also up towards the Brooks Range, we've got a blizzard warning along the eastern slopes of the Brooks Range until 6 a.m. Thursday, along with a snow advisory on the south slopes of the Brooks Range there for about 2 to 4 additional more inches of snow through tomorrow morning. Taking a look at the Arctic coast, some high surf advisories were posted by our office in Fairbanks until, well, the Barrow area, 6 p.m. this evening, and likely to extend that out into tomorrow morning, with some high surf conditions also expected through tomorrow morning along the eastern Arctic coast. Taking a look at the satellite imagery, starting with the North Pacific look, you can see what's going on here. The next big system is forming down here. This system is going to keep intensifying over the next couple of days and move on up towards the south side of the central to western Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at the loop one more time, in the Bering Sea itself, basically rather benign conditions right now, because it's been dominated by an area of high pressure. Taking a look at the GOES satellite loop over the mainland portion of the state, here's our system that's coming in overnight tonight, and this is eventually going to move on over towards southeast Alaska, spreading precipitation in advance of it as it does so. Running the loop, you can see the clouds and the warm front pushing up towards Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the mainland portion of the state. Generally speaking, some clear conditions, sunny conditions over the south central region over into the Yukon and Kuskokwim River deltas, but otherwise, as you can see in the satellite imagery, generally pretty cloudy conditions throughout the state. A trough and an old frontal system is moving through that northeastern portion of the state, responsible for the snow and the blowing snow conditions that are occurring up there. Today's weather map, we can see there's this low pressure system up in the Arctic with what's left of a trough front that's dissipated to a trough extending down into the eastern Brooks Range and down into the interior. This was producing the snow across that region, as well as the windier conditions with the blizzard warnings in effect along the eastern slopes of the Brooks Range, or the eastern portion of the Brooks Range. Snow was occurring along the Arctic coast, basically from Barrow east, some cloudier conditions to the west. Some rain showers are scattered throughout the northwest and western interior of the state towards the Seward Peninsula. Some isolated showers were also being reported over the Kuskokwim River Valley out to the Kuskokwim Delta. Over the south central region, earlier in the day there was some rain that has since cleared up. Sunnier conditions are prevailing now. Some isolated showers towards the Bristol Bay area, some rain along the North Gulf Coast, and some showers were occurring throughout southeast Alaska. And here's our next system that's moving into the picture. This will be bringing some rain up towards the Kodiak Island and Alaska Peninsula areas overnight, tonight, and tomorrow. In the Bering Sea, high pressure was continued to be the rule out there, as it has been for the last several days. Very benign conditions out into the western Aleutian Islands, generally cloudy with some patchy fog throughout the day today. Taking a look at the forecast for tonight, here's our frontal system and low pressure system moving on up into the Bristol Bay area to Kodiak Island, pushing that moisture right on up in advance of it. Expecting rain throughout the Alaska Peninsula into the Bristol Bay region and Kodiak Island. Rain on the southern Kenai Peninsula will be gradually spreading north overnight. Along the North Gulf Coast, expect generally clear conditions overnight. By morning or late morning tomorrow, we'll see the clouds rolling in there. Southeast Alaska, the showers should end, and expect just cloudy conditions to persist throughout the Panhandle. Over the southeastern mainland and the eastern interior, you can see this high pressure is going to result in generally clear conditions throughout that area right on down to the Kuskokwim Delta region along the Kuskokwim River Valley. Up along the Arctic coast, our one trough moved out of the picture. We still have this secondary trough. We keep getting these troughs of low pressure wrapping around the main low, keeping some snow showers, a mixture of rain and snow showers over the western Arctic coast, snow showers towards Barrow and that western portions of the Brooks Range, snow continuing over the eastern Arctic coast and eastern Brooks Range. That'll be tapering off through the overnight hours. Out into the Bering Sea, again, high pressure is going to be the rule out there at least through tonight. Some patchy fog along the Aleutian Islands can be anticipated. Cloudy conditions through the Bering Sea. Weak low pressure up into the northern Bering Sea and that Bering Strait region should bring some rain to the St. Lawrence Island area. Taking a look at the forecast for Thursday, our front continues to push on up towards the North Gulf Coast with the warm front pushing up towards southeast Alaska. The low pressure system will be over the Alaska Peninsula with a triple point low south of the Kenai Peninsula. Expect rain to spread throughout the northern 2/3 of southeast Alaska. There's a chance you might see some rain in the southern Panhandle. Rain along the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, and that'll be spreading into the Sound throughout the day, into the northern Sound by late in the afternoon to early evening hours. Rain can be expected in the Bristol Bay area, the Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island as well. Cloudy conditions over the south central region and southwestern Alaska. Sunny conditions should prevail over that eastern interior, basically the Copper River Basin on up into the Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley. Up along the Arctic coast, there's still that trough of low pressure that's exiting to the east. Expect snow showers from Barrow east and as well as along the eastern portions of the Brooks Range. In the Bering Strait region, with this low pressure system sitting here, expect some rain to continue over the St. Lawrence Island area. Should kick some showers over towards the Seward Peninsula in the Nome area. In the Bering Sea itself, in the eastern Bering Sea, generally cloudy conditions are going to prevail throughout the Bering Sea. Expect some morning fog over the Pribilof Islands, eastern Aleutian Islands, right on out through the remainder of the Aleutian Islands towards Shemya. Taking a look now at the forecast for Friday. Our low pressure system in the Gulf and Bristol Bay is weakening, but it's going to continue to push moisture on up into southeast Alaska as well as along the North Gulf Coast. Rain in the Panhandle, at least the northern 2/3 of it, is likely going to be pretty heavy at times. May see as much as an inch or two of rainfall in those portions of the Panhandle right on up towards Yakutat. Prince William Sound expected to be rainy and somewhat foggy conditions, patchy fog. Over the south central region, cloudy conditions should prevail. There is a chance that you may see some rain in the Cook Inlet area as well as up into the Susitna Valley. The southern portions of Cook Inlet will likely see some rain, as will the Bristol Bay area. Potentially even at least western Kodiak Island should see rain. There's a chance that Kodiak itself could see some rain as well. Across the Alaska Peninsula, the moisture is kind of moving off to the east. Cloudy conditions are going to prevail there. Cloudy conditions across the length of the Aleutian Islands, some patchy fog in the Bering Sea. And you can see this next system that's starting to move into the picture. This is going to bring some stronger winds on up towards the Aleutian Islands and eventually spread that rain into the central and western Aleutian Islands late in the day Friday as well as into the weekend. Taking a look now at temperatures around the state today. Southeast Alaska generally saw temperatures in the 50s with a low 60-degree reading down towards Ketchikan and Annette. Along the North Gulf Coast and the Cook Inlet region, Prince William Sound area in the 50s, mid to upper 50s. Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula saw temperatures generally in the low to mid 60s. Temperatures didn't quite warm up as much in the Copper River Basin, generally into the mid 40s to low 50s there, mid 50s into the Susitna Valley, up into the eastern interior and the Tanana Valley, temperatures in the mid 40s to low 50s, right on up to the south slopes of the Brooks Range, well, the upper Yukon Valley in the mid 40s there. Moving our focus up to the northern portion of the state and then to the west. Along the Arctic coast, temperatures on the cool side in the mid-30s throughout the length of the Arctic coast. In the Brooks Range itself, temperatures only got up into the upper 20s in that Umiat area. As we move on over towards the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound area, you can see temperatures generally in the 40s, right on down to Norton Sound. Southwestern Alaska, at least in the Yukon Delta, temperatures were into the low 50s. And then as we move further to the south and west, the Kuskokwim Delta saw temperatures generally in the mid-50s. Same thing in the Bristol Bay area, with some temperatures getting into the upper 50s there. Mid to low 50s along the Alaska Peninsula, mid-50s in the Pribilof Islands, low 50s, as you can see, over the eastern Aleutian Islands on Alaska and Dutch Harbor, mid-50s over towards Atka and Adak, as well as low 50s as we move on out towards Shemya. Taking a look at our low temperature forecast for tonight, southeast Alaska, expect temperatures really not to change much, upper 40s to lower 50s until you get up towards Yakutat, where it should be into the lower 40s there. Prince William Sound area, upper 30s to mid 40s. In the Copper River Basin, mid-30s, even into the 20s in some areas. The Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley, expect your temperatures to be in the 20s to even as low as 17 towards the Canadian border there. Eastern portions of the Brooks Range, temperatures right around 20. Along the Arctic coast, basically because the wind is going to keep things a bit mixed up, atmospherically speaking, temperatures are only going to drop a few degrees in the upper 20s to low 30s there. The Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait region, expect your temperatures in the Kotzebue Sound area, upper 20s to mid-30s, low 30s to mid-30s as we get on over the Seward Peninsula. Southwestern Alaska, you see your temperatures in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, mid-30s to low 40s, mid-40s in the Bristol Bay area. Down in the Alaska Peninsula, expect your temperatures to stay in the low to mid-50s, upper 40s to low 50s over the Pribilof Islands down to the eastern Aleutian Islands, and temperatures generally right around 50 along the Aleutian Islands themselves. Taking a look at the high temperature forecast for tomorrow, southeast Alaska, temperatures generally going to be in the mid to upper 50s. A few readings should get into right around 60. North Gulf Coast, mid-50s, Cook Inlet region, south central region, upper 50s to low 60s, mid-50s in the Copper River Basin, right on up into the Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon Valley in the low 50s. Thanks to the abundant sunshine that we're expecting there, it's going to get things a little bit warmer than it was today. The Brooks Range, expect your temperatures to be in the mid to upper 30s. The Arctic coast, mid to upper 30s to low 40s over the western Arctic coast. Your Seward Peninsula area, expect your temperatures to be in the upper 40s to low 50s in Kotzebue Sound, to the low 50s to mid 50s around Norton Sound, mid to upper 50s as we move on down to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, to the low 60s in Bristol Bay, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Pribilof Islands, expect your temperatures to make it into the mid-50s. Same thing for the eastern Aleutian Islands and the Dutch Harbor area, and out across the Aleutian Islands themselves, generally speaking, in the mid-50s with about a 53-degree temperature expected out at Shemya for tomorrow's high. Taking a look at our flying weather tomorrow, marginal conditions throughout southeast Alaska, along the North Gulf Coast with IFR conditions into Prince William Sound, the south side of the Kenai Peninsula, across Kodiak Island, as well as the south side of the eastern Alaska Peninsula. Marginal conditions throughout Bristol Bay, right on down to the remainder of the Alaska Peninsula. Pretty much widespread marginal conditions throughout much of the Bering Sea. Even though it's high pressure, expect to see significant areas of cloud cover there. Some IFR conditions up into the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island area associated with that low pressure system. Some marginal conditions up into the Kotzebue Sound area. Marginal conditions over the eastern portions of the Arctic coast and the eastern portions of the Brooks Range. And potentially you may see some IFR conditions out in the extreme western Aleutian Islands. For our passes tomorrow, Anik-Tuvik Pass, expect it to be marginal conditions, eventually getting over to VFR as conditions move off to the east. Adigan Pass, same thing, marginal conditions to start with, becoming VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill, expect your conditions to become marginal throughout the day tomorrow. Expect marginal conditions in Rainy Pass, and Windy Pass should remain VFR all day tomorrow, as should Isabel Pass VFR condition, as well as Mentasta Pass VFR conditions. Tonita Pass, expect VFR conditions, and Portage Pass, it'll start off as VFR, becoming marginal as the day progresses, and down in southeast Alaska, marginal to IFR conditions are what you should anticipate for both Chilkoot and White Pass. For our freezing levels tomorrow, expect the freezing levels at the surface basically along the Arctic coast to 2,000 feet along the Brooks Range, sloping up to about 8,000 feet as we get down towards the Gulf of Alaska, to 10,000 feet in southeast Alaska, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, sloping back down to about 8,000 feet out across the western and central Aleutian Islands. Icing tomorrow, expect occasional to widespread moderate mixed icing to develop over southeast Alaska, particularly the northern half of the Panhandle, from the freezing level to 18,000 feet. Some isolated moderate rime icing over the south central region here down to the Alaska Peninsula, associated with the rainy type weather that we're expecting with that low pressure system coming into the picture from your freezing level to 12,000 feet. Taking a look at the jet stream for tomorrow, expect about 110 knot jet coming along the Brooks Range and dropping off to about 100 knots over the as it moves over the Yukon Territory. Expect about a 55 knot jet south of the central Aleutian, 65 knots coming up into the south central region, and then a very weak component of the jet south of the Gulf, about 30 to 45 knots. Taking a look down at that 9,000 foot level, 25 to 30 knot winds along the eastern Arctic slope, 15 to 20 knot winds from the western Arctic coast down across the Brooks Range, light winds over much of the western portion of the state. In the Gulf of Alaska, about 35 to 45 knot winds, tapering off to 15 to 25 knots over southeast Alaska. Out across the Bering Sea, pretty much light winds as you would expect with a high pressure system dominating the picture there. And then for the 3,000 foot level, about 20 to 30 knot winds over the eastern Arctic coast, light winds over the mainland, 25 to 35 knot winds to 45 knots across the Gulf of Alaska, lighter winds over southeast Alaska as well as the Bering Sea. And for turbulence tomorrow, expect some isolated moderate turbulence over the eastern Arctic slope there and coast, as well as isolated moderate turbulence below 2,000 feet over Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay and the eastern Alaska Peninsula. That wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back for the marine forecast.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. Each year Alaska's coastal areas are battered by storms that produce strong winds and large waves. Some of these storms can cause significant damage as their related storm surges punish Alaska's coasts. Here today to discuss storm surges is Sam Albanese, the warning coordination meteorologist at the Anchorage Forecast Office. Welcome into the studio today, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
What time of year are storm surges most likely to occur?
Well, the favorable time of year is the fall storm season, basically late August, September, October into November, before you have your ice pack developed on the Bering Sea, and it's just when we start to see those strong storms first starting to materialize after the summer.
What regions of the state are most vulnerable to these types of events?
Well, essentially, you start from the Bristol Bay region and go up the Bering Sea coast up to the Seward Peninsula, and that's the most predominant region where we do see these storm surges. They can happen in other parts of the state, but that's where it's most likely to be the biggest impact.
So you're typically going to see a big storm move into the Bering Sea, and then it's going to be on that southern side of the low probably, right?
Yeah, that's correct. The southern side of the low, or where you have a long fetch, could be on the east side of the low. If the low moves pretty far north through the Bering Sea, up through the Bering Strait, that's when that Nome area, Seward Peninsula, really tends to see a significant surge.
And what happens when you have the ice pack coming down and you have a storm surge? Does that protect the coastal areas in some way, or is...
Not really. Some people would think it does, but essentially the benefit of the ice pack is that it will dampen the development of the surge, or the continued development of the surge, because when the wind's blowing over the ice pack, you don't build up your swell. But when that surge is developing outside the ice pack and transfers into it, well, then it's just a transfer of momentum. The ice pack rides up and down on that swell, kind of like that onion skin type of an analogy, where it really doesn't do a lot other than to mitigate the continued development of the surge.
I'm reminded of that video. Was it in the Pribilof Islands when the Coast Guard was rescuing?
Oh yeah,
it
just
the
throws
famous
the ice
one with
around.
the captain and his crew.
Well, one of the big famous storm surge cases was up in Nome, where there was blocks of ice thrown up onto Front Street, and you're talking car-sized blocks of ice. So the ice pack doesn't really do a lot to dampen the surge significantly. Once it's developed, it floats on the water.
Is the storm surge associated with these Alaskan storms, are they similar to what a hurricane storm surge is like?
In a way they are, except for the fact that a hurricane is a tropical storm. We're dealing with extratropical storms. And but the mechanism that's driving it, long fetch, strong wind, that's very similar in that. And you build up a big swell that impacts the coastal areas.
Now, what should people do to prepare for this type of event?
Well, first off, know where the danger areas are. What areas are prone to storm surge, historically, and then take the precautions necessary. If you're involved in the fishing industry, if you have a fish camp in an area that's prone to a storm surge, move your gear and your stuff out of the way so that it isn't going to be impacted by the storm surge. But really, it's critical just understanding what the danger areas are and making sure that your property is not in an area where it could be damaged.
Where will people get the notifications and warnings for
from the
coastal
Weather Service?
Flooding? Okay.
From the Weather Service. We issue the warnings for that. The coastal storm surge flood warnings come from the Anchorage Forecast Office or the Fairbanks Forecast Office, and even in some cases in southeast Alaska where there might be an area that's susceptible to a storm surge, the Juneau office would issue that.
Okay, and you have there's a website. The Anchorage Forecast Office has its own website.
That's correct.
Would you recommend people going to that particular website or maybe the regional website to get most of the warnings?
It's going to depend on where you live in the state. If you live up in the Seward Peninsula area, the Fairbanks Forecast Office is the office that provides service to your area. The Kuskokwim Delta down to Bristol Bay, that's done by the Anchorage Forecast Office, and anything down in southeast Alaska would be Juneau. But for simplicity, start with the Alaska region webpage and then go from there. Just simply use weather.gov and click over the area that you're interested in, and it'll direct you directly to the forecast office that provides your service.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in and talking about coastal storm surges. Hopefully no one has to be involved in that, but if it does happen, if it's not when it happens, that they're prepared. And thank you for coming in and talking about that today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you for joining us here in Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Welcome back, and now we'll take a look at our marine forecast for southeast Alaska on Thursday. Expect winds in the southern inside waters about 15 to 20 knots out of the southeast to 20 knots out of the south up through Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay. Southern outside waters about south to southwest 20 to 25 knots to southeast 25 knots as we move further north towards that east Gulf Coast. Taking a look at the area for Friday, southern inside waters down in the southern panhandle, southeast 15 knots. Winds are going to become southwest during the day, increasing to 25 knots over the central inside waters with south winds 30 knots up into the Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay area. Southern outside waters to the south, southwest winds 20 knots. And as we move further north towards the east Gulf Coast, expect your winds out of the southwest around 25 knots. Taking a look at the south central waters, expect winds in Prince William Sound and along the North Gulf Coast, 20 knots in the Sound out of the east, 30 knots along the North Gulf Coast, 35 knots south and east of the Barren Islands. Around Kodiak Island, southeast to northeast as we come on up into the Chillicothe Strait area, 25 knot winds there. In the Cook Inlet region, northern Cook Inlet, northeast 20 knots to 30 knots in the southern Cook Inlet region to 35 knot winds over the Augustine Island area out of the northeast. On Friday, winds led up in Prince William Sound to about 15 knots out of the northeast. South to southeast winds 20 knots along the North Gulf Coast. East winds 25 knots as we get south of the Seward area. Southeast winds 15 knots near the Barren Islands to northeast 15 over the Augustine area. Variable winds in the Chillicothe Strait area 10 knots. 15 knot southerly winds south of Kodiak Island. And then Cook Inlet itself, north winds about 10 to 15 knots. Taking a look at the Alaska Peninsula now for Thursday, expect Bristol Bay area to be northeast 25 knots as well as the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. South of the western portion of the Alaska Peninsula, winds will initially be out of the southeast, becoming northwesterly later in the day to 20 knots. The southeast winds 20 knots will prevail throughout the day south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula. On Friday, those winds will become variable 10 knots south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula, 15 knot northeasterlies in the Bristol Bay area, and then northwest winds 15 to 20 knots across the Alaska Peninsula on the north and south side itself. Taking a look at the Aleutian Islands for Thursday, expect your winds over the eastern Aleutian Islands to be north about 15 to 20 knots, 15 knots over the central Aleutian Islands out of the north, and then as we move on out to the western portions of the Aleutian Islands, expect 15 knot winds out of the east across those areas. Winds are going to kick up a bit across those areas by Friday, and this will be late in the day Friday by the time these winds pick up, actually more towards Friday night. Gale force winds can be expected over the western Aleutian Islands at 40 knots. Also expect your gale force winds over the central Aleutian Islands, 35 to 40 knots out of the east, and 25 to 30 knots as we move over towards the Nikolsky area, with 15 to 20 knot northerly winds over the Unalaska area. For our Bering Sea coastal waters, taking a look at that area for Thursday, expect your winds to be out of the north 15 knots in the Pribilof Islands, and north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots over the Nunivak Island region. Variable winds 10 knots over St. Matthew Island, with southeast winds 20 knots in the St. Lawrence Island waters. For Friday, winds will be northeast from the St. Lawrence Island waters down to St. Matthew Island, 15 knots. North winds 20 knots across the Nunivak Island waters, and northeast winds 15 knots over the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at the Arctic coastal region for Thursday, expect your winds outside of Kotzebue Sound to be out of the northeast at about 20 knots, 10 knots over towards Cape Lisburne. Northwesterly winds 20 knots as we move on over towards Barrow, and northwest to west winds 30 to 35 knots as we move on over to the eastern Arctic coastal waters. Taking a look at the forecast now for Friday. Here we go. Expect your winds outside of Kotzebue Sound to be out of the northeast, 15 knots. East winds 10 knots over by Cape Lisburne to Point Lay to 10 knots there out of the south. Southwest winds 15 knots by Barrow, with west winds 20 to 30 knots as we go over those eastern Arctic coastal waters. Taking a look now at the forecast again for tonight. Remember, we do have that blizzard warning up across the eastern portions of the Brooks Range, with some snow expected on the south slopes of the eastern portion of the Brooks Range, snow along the eastern Arctic coast with this system up there. So expect generally snowy, wintry type conditions there. Clear, cooler conditions can be expected across much of the interior, with rain spreading up across southwestern Alaska. We're out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching, and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.